Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, the super tough Pink Puff makes his North American debut, Mario's second Super Nintendo game, and yet another Dungeons & Dragons game. Hi, I'm your host Jared, and today is August 5th, 1992. A seemingly unassuming small project for a small console featuring a small guy would grow to be our gargantuan success. Released on August 1st, 1992, was Kirby's Dream Land for the Nintendo Game Boy. Most people know Kirby now for being an adorable round pink guy who has a penchant for consuming enemies like the eldritch horror he truly is. He could then steal their powers to use as his own to battle through stages. However, in his debut game, Kirby's Dream Land, Kirby didn't do that. There were no powers to steal, and he wasn't even pink. Gameplay of Kirby's Dream Land is still familiar to anyone who's ever played any other Kirby game after this one. Go through many levels, sucking in enemies and spitting them back out to defeat others. He could still fly around as much as he wanted to make any kind of platforming a spring breeze. Kirby's Dream Land was the very first game worked on by Masahiro Sakurai at only age 19. His idea was to make a very simple, very easy platformer for the Game Boy, as it was meant to be a sort of gateway game for a younger audience to explore other harder platform style games, which is why the gameplay is so basic and Kirby can literally fly over everything. Kirby wasn't even supposed to be the main character. He was a placeholder sprite that they ended up loving anyways. During development, Kirby was originally named Twinkle Popo, and development studio HAL Laboratories was going to publish it themselves. However, when interest in their title was low, they asked if Nintendo would publish it. Nintendo said, okay, but we're gonna make some changes. One, his name isn't Twinkle Popo. In order to help his international appeal, they asked Nintendo of America what a good American sounding name would be for the cute little guy. They said, Kirby. Now, legend has it, the reason Nintendo of America gave this name was that they just settled a lawsuit with Universal Studios over the rights of the name Donkey Kong. Nintendo won that lawsuit, and their lawyer's name was John Kirby, which is where they got the name. Allegedly. Kirby's release in the West caused a lot of confusion over his color. Masahiro Sakurai has stated that he always saw Kirby as pink. Japanese advertisements for Kirby's Dream Land even had him as pink. But for Nintendo of America, they only had the Game Boy game to work off of, and that didn't display any colors, so naturally, they thought he was grayscale.
Recently, we compared two superheroes, Dashing Super Guy and Kirby from Nintendo. In some ways, Kirby lost big. No big hair, no big muscles, no weapons, nothing. All Kirby's got is appetite. Kirby's Dream Land, the thrilling new adventure game on Game Boy. Kirby munches, spits back, and floats, saving glorious Dreamland. He's Kirby, and he packs a mean bite. Kirby's Dream Land, only on Game Boy.
By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. The box art, advertising, and US television commercial all have a black and white Kirby. Don't worry though, they would fix this with Kirby's very next game, Kirby's Adventure for the NES, less than a year later. Kirby's Dream Land went on to sell millions for the Game Boy. The aforementioned NES sequel then cemented Kirby's ability to gain powers. He would go on to have numerous sequels, including Kirby's Dream Land 2 on the Game Boy in 1995, Kirby's Dream Land 3 for the Super NES in 1997, Kirby Superstar, Kirby's Dream Course, Kirby Star Stacker, Kirby Tilt and Tumble, Kirby Air Ride. There's like dozens more, with the most recent being Kirby and the Forgotten Land for Nintendo Switch in 2022, with another Kirby game already on the way. As for how Kirby's Dream Land holds up today, I don't like it. It's really hard to go back to and not have Kirby's signature abilities to steal. In fact, as a kid, I played Kirby's Adventure first and then this one, and I was confused why nothing was working when I was swallowing enemies for sword or cutter. It also really is way too easy, but that's exactly what they were going for. If that wasn't a big enough release for you, also released on the very same day of August 1st, 1992, was Mario Paint for the SNES.
It was quiet, except for the cows. Then a rock fell from the sky, so I sat on it. but it was really a spaceship. Then these aliens surrounded me, and I could actually read their minds. Should we fry him or boil him? Whoa! So I pushed a button and made him disintegrate. Okay, so I made it up. Then I made it all happen.
Mario Paint. Draw and make music. Only on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
Mario Paint was one of the first home console creative art video games, where the goal isn't to beat any kind of level, but rather to grab some virtual brushes and let your imagination fly. It was kid picks for the Super Nintendo. Mario Paint could only be played with an all-new accessory bundled in with every copy of the game, the SNES mouse, allowing for precision and more natural painting movements. In addition to making images or coloring pre-made ones, you could also make primitive animations, compose your own music, or take a break with the Nat Attack minigame. Mario Paint was a move by Nintendo that can only be described as ingenious. It showed parents that video games could be more than just brain noise. It could also be a creative outlet inspiring young minds. It also got people to have the SNES mouse, allowing for future games to take advantage of it. Even with a premium price point bundle, it sold over 2 million copies. Its legacy is still seen to this day in a variety of forms. The music composer spawned an entire subgenre of sorts on the internet, with many people making original songs, or more famously, hundreds of covers of well-known songs using the Mario Paint music composer online. Decades-long running web animation series Homestar Runner, home of the Strong Bad Emails cartoons, had its very first episode created using the animation tools in Mario Paint. Super Mario Maker and Super Mario Maker 2 would also borrow elements from Mario Paint, namely the undo dog, the core spot, and the inclusion of the Nat Attack minigame. As far as official sequels go, there was only ever Mario Artist for the ill-fated Nintendo 64 disk drive, the Japan-only CD-ROM attachment. And it wasn't just one Mario Artist game, it was 3. Mario Artist Paint Studio, Mario Artist Polygon Studio, and Mario Artist Talent Studio. There are even 4 more Mario Artist entries planned, but those were canceled with the failure of the 64DD. As far as the SNES Mario Paint goes, I still love it. Admittedly, as a kid, I did play the Nat Attack minigame a lot, and I was too young to know how to make any kind of music, but I would spend entire afternoons just creating my own masterpieces. And then seeing all the fun ways to obliterate them all with the numerous delete all buttons. If you've been keeping track, you know that there's already been 2 Dungeons & Dragons video games released this year. And now, we have the third. Dungeons & Dragons Warriors of the Eternal Sun, released for the Sega Genesis on July 31st, 1992. This D&D game mixes overhead exploration and first-person dungeon crawling. Like most other D&D games of the time, you can create your entire party from scratch, choosing from a handful of playable classes and races. When you see enemies on the overworld, battle switches to a turn-based strategy, very similar to previous D&D games like Pool of Radiance. However, if you're in a dungeon, combat plays out in real time, playing more akin to the Eye of the Beholder series of games. Between all of this is your typical D&D fare, getting new equipment, leveling up, and saving the land from the big bad evil guy. All of this while playing to some surprisingly jammin' music. It still uses the AD&D 2.0 rule set, which means classes level up at different speeds, magic spells are rare, and if you don't already know what THAC0 is, read a wiki article explaining it. Warriors of the Eternal Sun was developed by Westwood Associates, who would later become part of Westwood Studios, meaning this development team was not part of the SSI Gold Box games like Pool of Radiance, but they were the developers to the previous D&D game on this show, Dragon Strike on the NES, and they would eventually be known for creating a franchise called Command & Conquer. Fun fact, Warriors of the Eternal Sun takes place in the D&D setting of Mystara, placing it alongside only a handful of other D&D video games in that setting, namely Order of the Griffin for the TurboGrafx 16 and Dungeons & Dragons Tower of Doom and Shadows over Mystara, the iconic beat-em-ups from Capcom. Reviews at the time were self-admittedly biased. Electronic Gaming Magazine gave it some 7s, but also had 2 scores of 4, with those reviewers basically saying they don't like RPGs. As for what I think of it, that's a pretty well done D&D game. The overhead movement reminded me of the later Ultima games, and I still like first-person dungeon crawling, but be forewarned, this game is hard as balls. I spent like 50 minutes making my entire party, perfecting them to be as best as possible, and I then walked outside the castle walls and watched every single one of them get absolutely obliterated by 5 snakes. And they weren't even sticks before that. And as for the other games released this week, take it away, Editor Dylan.
The only other game released this week was Neotopia 2.
Hey, who spilled their Zelda all over my TurboGrafx 16?
Hudson.
Oh, Hudson. Okay.
That means this week I counted a total of 4 games released, 1 for each system listed here. Kirby's Dream Land would go on to be the 9th best-selling game for the Game Boy. Back to you, Jared.
Back in the collector's corner, even after selling millions, Kirby still has some decent value, with just under $25 for the cartridge alone, and just under $100 with the box and the manual. Mario Paint, on the other hand, is dirt cheap at less than $10 for just the game. However, having it complete with the SNES mouse, that weird plastic mousepad thing, and the oversized box makes it worth closer to $100. Warriors of the Eternal Sun didn't really see much value increase. You can find the game alone for about $25, and even a complete one is a meager $45. And that's it for today. Next week, a groundbreaking cinematic platformer, Might and Magic, and a weird-ass puzzler. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. Please like the video and subscribe if you aren't already, and leave a comment down below. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for watching this show. Did anyone else play a lot of Mario Paint as a kid? My favorite thing to do was to paint the entire thing brown and then erase pathways and caverns so I could have a little underground living habitat for a family of Yoshis.